stop the far right from hijacking issues, especially when so many members of those groups often say they are being influenced by charismatic leaders who are often pushing for the division that you say that you want to tackle? And a second quick question, if I may. British Muslims up and down the country, to call them, unfold. They've seen mosques get attacked. They've watched as shops have been looted. There have been chants which some would say are grossly offensive. Partly this has happened because of misinformation. They now say they feel unsafe. What is your message to the British Muslim community, and what are you willing to do to make sure they feel safe in their own home?
Well, taking both parts of that, I think it is really important to emphasise over and over again the price paid for those that put out misinformation and interfere in the work that the authorities are trying to do in Southport. The price is paid ultimately by the mums and dads who are grieving their children. Because if there isn't a fair trial that gives them the justice they demand, they are the ones that are going to suffer the most. And so nobody but nobody should pretend that they are speaking for those families when they involve themselves in activity like this. Because they are putting what is now the single most important thing for those families, which is to grieve properly and to have the justice to which they are entitled. And that's why this is so important. In relation to the Muslim community, look, let me be very clear. I will take every step that's necessary to keep you safe. And that's why I said what I said about mosques being attacked because they're mosques. The far right is showing who they are. We have to show who we are in response to that, and that's why we pulled together this response this afternoon to try and coordinate and make sure that as we face the next few days and weeks, we have the strongest possible response in order to ensure that there is safety for all of our citizens, including those Muslims who will see, as you rightly say, attacks on their mosques because they're mosques. Thank you. I've got John from Sky.
Thank you. John Craig from Sky News. You've talked about better coordination. Clearly, that's one of the purposes of this meeting. How concerned are you about perhaps apparent inconsistencies of approach by police forces? For example, 4 arrests in Southport, over 100 here. Different groups being treated differently, whether it's far left, far right, as some have suggested. Resources you've mentioned, smaller forces not being able to cope. We saw, didn't we, in Southport that Merseyside had to call in help from other forces. You've said no to extra police powers, but what about banning some of these far right groups, as Angela Rayner has suggested?
Well, look, in relation to the inconsistency, I don't think you can simply measure the number of arrests and say there's an inconsistency, because that will depend event by event. But look, yes, this afternoon was an attempt and an agreement, actually, to pull together a national response so that that consistency, that support is there, and the sharing of intelligence and data. That's not a criticism of any of the forces that are trying to deal with difficult situations as they arise on their patch, but it is to give them the support that they need more quickly so that they can react more robustly. In relation to preventative that came up this morning was, this afternoon, I'm sorry, is criminal behaviour orders, which can be attached to convictions for these sorts of offences, which then give the police and the authorities the ability to put their arms around and have a tighter grip of those that have already shown their true colours and been convicted. And I would personally like to see more use of those orders in the same way that they're used in football hooligan cases to stop people travelling, identify and prevent their patterns of behaviour. Because these are not people who are going to protest. You don't go to protest with a rock in your hand. You go to commit violent disorder. And we need to be really clear about that. And I think those orders would help much. I've got Jason from the Mail.
Thanks, PM. Do you welcome the decision to name the suspect in this case, apparently taken to end some of the disinformation? And this is a pretty unusual summit for August. People are going on holiday now. Are you worried about we could be facing a sort of summer of riots?
Well, firstly, on the naming of the individual, that's a matter, obviously, for the court. A decision's been taken today, so that is now in the public domain. I won't say more about that because the purpose of the rules in relation to the information that's available is to ensure there can be a fair trial, and my starting point on that is very much the victims and their families, because you know, and I have seen this in other cases, the price for a trial that goes wrong is paid by the family and friends and victims of crime. In this case, I can't imagine the added pain that would be piled on in this case if there was anything that got in the way of the trial of this particular issue. Look, in relation to what happens over the next few weeks and months, it is obvious to me, and I think obvious to anybody looking in, that so far as the far right is concerned, this is coordinated, this is deliberate, this is not a protest that has got out of hand. It is a group of individuals who are absolutely bent on violence. And that's why it's important, I think, to pull together the senior police and law enforcement leaders, as we did today, to ensure that that is met with the most robust response in the coming days and weeks. I've got Aubrey from The Times.
Thank you, Prime Minister. You said that violent disorder is being whipped up online. What are you going to do to combat that spread of disinformation? Are you going to haul in social media companies? Could you restart the rapid rebuttal unit in Whitehall? And what is your message to Nigel Farage, who obviously asked this week whether the truth is being withheld? Do you think that was responsible for anything?
In relation to the platform providers, some of it isn't as complicated as it may at first seem. So inciting violence online is a criminal offence. And that is not a matter of free speech. It is a criminal offence. Clearly, in relation to platform providers, there's a balance to be struck. Social media platform providers, it's an amazing opportunity that we all enjoy as a country, that is very important to us, that these platforms are there to be used for the great opportunities that they provide. There is also a responsibility that goes conversation to take place. In relation to the comments of others, look, I'm not going to stand here and cast judgment on what others are saying. I know what I'm saying, and I know why I'm saying it very, very clearly, which is my focus, whenever I'm confronted with any questions about this, is on the families and victims of those, particularly in Southport, who were so affected by this. I would also add the police officers. I had the privilege of going up the day after this incident to speak to the police officers who had to deal in responding, the first responders to this. Remarkably but unsurprisingly, they were back on duty. But I'm not going to pretend to you that they weren't affected by what they had to witness, what they'd had to deal with. They said to me, as they always do, I was simply doing my job, and of course they were. But doing your job, you know, there's no way what happened to them or what they had to endure, had to respond to, was anything other than extraordinarily challenging. And I think that if we all start with a clear focus on the victims, their families, and the police officers who had to respond to this horrific attack, that would be a good template or framework for the discussion of all of these matters. I've got Rowena from The Guardian.
Rowena Mason from The Guardian. Nigel Farage is the leader of Reform. He did very well, obviously, in the election, and he's been accused of spreading conspiracy theories about the Southport tragedy and his response to it. Is it enough to say that you just won't comment on what he's said, given that some people, including a former police chief, have linked his comments to the violence that broke out in the riots?
Look, you know, I'm not going to run a sort of running commentary on the motives of other people. What I am saying is my focus is on the families, the victims who are at the heart of this, and I think that that should be the focus for everybody. Anybody who says or does anything that impedes their ability to get the justice that they deserve cannot claim to be acting in their best interests, because they're not. Thank you. And I've got John from the Mirror.
Hello, thank you. What consequences will there be if social media firms do fail to take action?
Well, I think there's a discussion to be had, and it is a balance, and it needs to be the right balance, because social media is a fantastic opportunity, but it also carries responsibility, and that's the mature discussion that we've had. What we've done today is have a discussion with law enforcement and the police, which is about pulling things together for a coordinated response. What has not worked well recently with the previous government, in my view, is the performative politics of a government blaming everybody else and pointing fingers. That approach to me is not effective. It's the performative politics that I've put an end to with a government of service. My approach is different, which is to roll my sleeves up, get the relevant people around the table and fix the problems and meet the challenges that we have as a country. We did that with law enforcement and the police this afternoon. A similar approach with social media, which is not performative politics, which gets you nowhere, but the politics of service, which is to actually work together to address the challenges that we have and make sure that we keep the country safe and respect the values of our fellow citizens, which are about law enforcement, security and safety. Thank you all very much indeed.